Hello everybody, this is the Monoculture lecture in the Agriculture and Pest Management unit. So what we know is that agriculture is one of the biggest impacts on land use on the planet, right? There is a bunch of land that is devoted wholly to agriculture. In the US, we generally see it in, the Great Plains, the non-mountainous areas with really good soil for growing stuff. But worldwide, what we see is about 36% of the land is under some sort of agriculture, whether that is, farming or livestock growth. What we see is that 36%. So that's a huge amount of land. That's a huge amount of the Earth's surface that is being used to basically grow food for us. Where we don't see it is, basically mountainous areas, tundra areas way up north, coniferous forests. The taiga just isn't super great for farming. It's the growing season just isn't long enough. So what we see though is that's only about 11%, 10.9% of our land is arable, meaning it can be grow crops without irrigation. So when we see this 36%, that means a lot of our land needs to be irrigated. Some of that is livestock, and that doesn't necessarily need to be irrigated. But it shows that we're using a lot of land more than would be naturally able to be used. So when we think about the different types of agriculture, the textbook really differentiates between this labor-intensive versus mechanized agriculture, and I'm not really sure why the textbook does that. So it talks about how growing in rice paddies. That's right here. Workers need to do a lot of stuff by hand, of actually planting rice plants with their hands actually. Versus what we see here in the United States and Canada and Australia and parts of Europe, where it's all done via machines and big combines and things like that. But from an ecosystem impact standpoint, it really doesn't matter whether you have a wheat field that's completely covered in wheat, or these mountainsides where there's terraces filled with water that have rice plants growing in them. It doesn't really make an ecological difference. Both are drastically changing the environment, where the native species that would have lived here definitely can't. What we see then is most agriculture, whether we're thinking about a mechanized or a labor-intensive style of agriculture, we're really seeing monoculture is kind of what is the norm. And what that monoculture means is planting large areas with just a single species. Okay. Now, why do farmers do this? So if we look at this cornfield here, we've got basically a bunch of corn, and that's it, right? They put chemicals on to kill off everything except the corn. Now, why do they do that? Well, that means all the corn seeds need to be planted at one time. So they don't need to think about, if they were doing multiple species, you don't need to think about planting, on May 29th, I need to plant my corn, but then after, a week or two later, I need to plant this other seed, and 3 weeks later, I need to plant this other seed. Basically, you only have one job to do in each field. And so whether planting, cultivating, or harvesting, it all happens on the same schedule, and you only need one piece of equipment, okay? And what we see now is that there's getting to be more examples of polyculture, where you're growing multiple species together for specific reasons. So, but this is still relatively uncommon. One place where you do see it is kind of in fruit orchards, where you have some space in between trees. You can grow more shade-loving plants, shade-tolerant plants that can grow a little bit in the shade and still do okay. So what we see is when you have monoculture, you have a lot of nutrient depletion, right? So when you think about a whole field of corn, all of that corn needs the same subset of nutrients, right? They always require a certain amount of nitrogen, a certain amount of phosphorus, and things like that. The repeated use then of growing a certain plant then requires a specific fertilizer. So one way to avoid that is with crop rotation, by going from, oftentimes what we see is growing wheat, corn, soybeans, and then rotate each year wheat, corn, soybeans, wheat, corn, soybeans. Can be a little bit difficult because a lot of farm equipment is extremely expensive, and each kind of crop that you grow needs some different type of equipment to be able to do that. So when we see monoculture, one of the main consequences is a loss of genetic diversity. So if you were to go to a specific place, let's say here in Wisconsin, and you look at the amount, the type and the, strain of wheat that is planted here versus the strain of wheat that is planted in Madison and the strain of wheat that is planted over towards Milwaukee, it's all essentially the same. Now, the reason they do this is so that all the grain is harvested at the same height, at the same time, and they can predict how much yield, how much crop they're going to get out of it. The thing is, when you lose genetic diversity, when every single plant is essentially a clone of everything else, it's vulnerable to a pest, right? When we have genetic diversity, what that means is certain pests won't be able to eat certain individuals. But since we have this monoculture of exactly the same genetic strain, clones of each other, if one insect can eat one individual, it means it can eat the entire field. And we see that then pests can specialize. And we see that there are so many chemical additions that are required because insects and pests are coming back year to year to try to eat these plants. And it's no wonder that they don't do this, or that pests are doing this, because of how much yield you can get out of a single field. So wheat usually is somewhere 71 bushels per acre, and I don't know what that means, but do some calculations here. One football field of wheat makes 200,000 pounds of food, right? So it's not surprising that you get these huge populations of pests that can then really screw things up with the farmer. And so our next lecture, we're going to be talking about how farmers deal with that, and which is essentially most often pesticide use. So with that, I'll leave you and see you later.